The air we breathe is often too thin, too saturated with the mundane suffering of existence. We seek refuge, do we not? But tell me, candid viewer, what if the most terrifying realization is not that we are trapped in the prison of the world, but that the deepest desire of the human heart is to construct a sepulchre within its own breast chamber where the light of consciousness is dimmed, where the incessant, accusatory murmur of the soul can finally find silence? This is where our morbid journey begins, not in the vulgar gutters where men stumble and fall, but in the most rarefied, agonizing corridors of the mind. Forget, for a moment, the sterile definitions of pathology. We are not here to discuss mere habit or lack of discipline. We are here to perform an autopsy on the modern condition, using the cadaver of addiction as our subject. The very title that draws you into this spectral contemplation is a key. Addiction is the language of the pain you don't speak. It is a truth heavy with lead and dripping with the dread of recognition. Addiction, in its myriad, insidious forms, be it the burning oblivion of the spirit, the narcotic lull of the electronic glow, the compulsive chase of ephemeral validation, or the dark comfort of ritualized self-destruction, is nothing more than a crude, desperate translator. It is the only dialect the terrified, subterranean self has mastered to communicate its ineffable agony to the daylight world. Consider the architecture of suffering. We are masters of concealment. We learn, early and swiftly, to break up the windows to the deepest wounds. We plaster over the fissures in our foundation with smiles, with industry, with the pretense of unassailable mental health. Yet, pain, like water, finding its path through rock, demands expression. If the legitimate pathways of articulation, sympathy, confession, vulnerability are blocked by pride, fear, or a justifiable terror of being misunderstood, the pain does not dissipate. It pools. It pools. It stagnates. It ferments into a venomous, compelling need for alteration. The true tragedy of the man who seeks perpetual escape is that he is not a hedonist. He is a thwarted philosopher. He looks into the void and, finding no immediate answer, chooses to become the void. He yearns for a state of being where the self is momentarily suspended, where the responsibility for that hidden, aching grief is outsourced to the agent of intoxication or compulsion. This desperate transaction forms the hook of our immediate attention. What precisely is it we are fleeing when we fling ourselves into the waiting arms of oblivion? Is it the world, or the precarious, fragile knowledge of our own decaying heart? We must establish the atmosphere immediately, dense, introspective, and utterly unforgiving in its pursuit of psychological truth. The video's visual mood must be one of encroaching shadow, a single flickering gas lamp, illuminating dusty velvet and decaying manuscript, reflecting the solitary, often cold brilliance of the addicted mind when it is focused solely on its objective. We are peeling back the skin of reality to reveal the throbbing, anxious nerves beneath. This pursuit of the temporary and aesthetic is the soul's greatest, most perilous adventure, invariably leading to the discovery that the cure becomes infinitely more damning than the original malady. We begin now the descent into that particular maelstrom. We have identified the darkness. Now we must chart its currents. The maelstrom is not merely a metaphor for destruction, but the precise psychological mechanism by which the mind, overwhelmed by unspeakable grief, chooses total disorientation over focused endurance. It is the moment when the captain of the soul deliberately steers toward the roaring vortex, preferring the temporary, dizzying rush of the spiral to the calm, interminable stretch of existential ocean. When we speak of the pain that finds voice only through compulsion, we are discussing a phenomenon far more intricate than mere physical craving. We are observing the soul's desperate, subterranean attempt at self-medication against the inherent malaise of being. The contemporary world, with its blinding speed and insistence on superficial joy, offers no sanctuary for the contemplative sorrow, no space for the processing of profound, incommunicable losses, the loss of youthful hope, the shadow of potential unfulfilled, the gnawing certainty of individual entropy. This is the genesis of the addict's phantasmal architect, the necessity of constructing an alternate reality where the gravity of these truths is nullified. The chosen substance or behavior, the bottle, the needle, the scroll of endless digital distraction, the feverish cambilis, not truly the objective. It is merely the key to the sepulchral chamber where genuine feeling is interred. The pursuit itself becomes a perverse form of devotion, a ritual as structured and demanding as any religious observance, guaranteeing a temporary, albeit borrowed, state of grace. Observe the elegancy and the destruction. The addict often possesses a hyper-awareness, a searing clarity about the illogicality of their actions. This is the ultimate Poean terror, the consciousness observing its own inevitable ruin, powerless to intervene, yet entirely complicit. The pain being expressed through the act is often the pain of this very knowledge, the knowledge that the self is fundamentally flawed, fractured, and incapable of enduring reality as is. The escape becomes a declaration of war against the self, the ultimate form of self-punishment for failing to be strong enough to simply be. Consider the vocabulary of this unsung pain. When the conscious mind denies the language of sorrow, when we refuse to admit, I am shattered by this grief, or I'm terrified by this future, the body, the spirit, and the compulsive drives take over. The language of addiction is a vocabulary of visceral symptoms. The tremor of the hand, the dulling of the senses, the frantic, accelerating pulse. These physical manifestations are not random. They are the italics in the dark message, the bolded emphasis in the declaration of despair. They scream, not, I want pleasure, but I need cessation. A silence so profound that even the heartbeat of memory is muffled. We are drawn, intrinsically, to the precipice. The thrill of the descent is often misinterpreted as excitement, when, in truth, it is the relief of relinquishing control to a powerful, mesmerizing force, the current of the middle. This surrender is seductive because it offers temporary relief from the crushing burden of free will, that terrible gift that forces us to choose existence moment by moment. Addiction removes the choice. It replaces agonism and liberty with the soothing, deterministic tyranny of craving. In this dark compromise, the deep, unspeakable pain finds its macabre voice, echoing through the empty halls of self-destruction. And we, the observers, are compelled to listen to this desperate, hypnotic monologue. The true complexity of this tragic dialect lies in its paradoxical nature. The mind, in its infinite capacity for self-deception, seeks order within the chaos of compulsion. The addictive ritual, the specific timing, the method of consumption, the isolationist, the imposition of a somber geometry onto a life that feels fundamentally shapeless and uncontrolled. It is the terrified soul seeking a script, an inexorable destiny to follow, because the burden of generating meaning anew each morning has proven too heavy to bear. We arrive now at the core paradox. The pursuit of self-annihilation requires immense, dedicated effort. This effort, this relentless focus on the agent of escape, is the manifestation of the unspeakable pain. It is the energy that should have been dedicated to healing, to connection, or to creation, diverted instead into the labyrinthine construction of one's own downfall. And this energy, tis Feberis meticulous planning, is what the ancient mariners knew as the irresistible, fatal pull of the vortex. The maelstrom demands attention, precision, and a total dedication to its swirling logic. But this perfect, dark order is disrupted by the telltale heart of consciousness. Even in the depths of chemical or behavioral oblivion, a small, cold, highly analytical part of the self remains awake. It listens. It judges. It is the relentless thrumming beneath the floorboards, the knowledge that this is temporary. The pain waits for your return. This awareness is the true source of the agonizing cycle. The escape provides relief from the original trauma, but the self-betrayal inherent in the escape generates a secondary, more caustic trauma: the guilt, the shame, and the profound, chilling realization that one has failed the self yet again. It is here, in the cold light of recognition, where the mind stands briefly poised between the abyss and the arduous ascent, that we must pause. If the shadows, we are dissecting the precise calculation of despair, the elegant rationale behind self-destruction, the sound of that hidden grief beating in the silence. If these echoes resonate within the architecture of your own introspection, then you are not merely a spectator, but a fellow traveler in this dark investigation. To recognize this dark kinship, this shared preoccupation with the abyssal depths of the human psyche, is to take the first step toward understanding the profound mechanics of our shared existential prison. If you find yourself compelled, held captive, much like the subject of our analysis, by the intricate, terrifying beauty of this descent, I invite you to lend your attention to the future spirals of this inquiry. Subscribe to this melancholy voyage. Let us confront these mysteries together. This affirmation allows the light of shared understanding to pierce the oppressive gloom. Having acknowledged the relentless monitor within the self, we must deepen our gaze into the mechanism of perpetuation. The cycle continues because the language of addiction is a performative language. It demands witnesses, even if those witnesses are only the shadows on the wall or the specter of the self in the mirror. The compulsion is an act of communication directed primarily inward. See, I am suffering. See, this suffering is unbearable. See, I deserve this annihilation. The severity of the means is directly proportional to the perceived unspeakability of the original wound. We prepare now to step beyond the individual psychology and examine the context of societal pressures, the modern isolation, the enforced separation from profound meaning that renders this dark language so desperately necessary for so many souls adrift. The complexity is only beginning to unfold as we realize that the individual ailment is merely a symptom of a larger systemic decay, a pervasive infection of the spirit that requires a more rigorous, even macabre, dissection. The pervasive infection of the spirit, hasadudit, is the atmosphere we collectively breathe, a noxious fog of unrelenting expectation and manufactured desire. When the world demands perpetual performance, when authenticity is penalized and vulnerability is weaponized, the soul retreats into the only territory it still governs, absolutely its own annihilation. The enigma of addiction lies in its inversion of natural law. It is a morbid form of creation, where the self dedicates its highest faculties to the production of its own demise. We must challenge the simplistic notion that addiction is a weakness of character. Such a diagnosis is a brutal simplification, a refusal to look into the abyss. Instead, let us view it as a horrific over-optimization of survival instincts, a twisted brilliance. The addicted mind, having analyzed the surrounding reality and concluded that the emotional cost of existence outweighs the reward, executes a perfect, cold logic: minimize feeling, maximize escape. The drug, the screen, the chastis are merely variables in a complex equation aimed at achieving zero emotional exposure. Consider the societal structures that necessitate this retreat. We live in an age of mandatory illumination, where the privacy of sorrow is denied. Grief is expected to be tidy, finite, and ultimately marketable. But the genuine, bone-deep agony that fuels compulsion is messy, subterranean, and refuses to adhere to the 5-act structure of recovery narratives. When society offers no dignified space for sustained, profound suffering, the suffering builds its own sanctuary, its own church of ruin, where the only sacrament is the agent of oblivion. This construction, this church of ruin, is built upon the foundational misunderstanding of desire. What the external world observes as want is, in reality, a desperate need. The addict needs, profoundly, to feel different than they feel now. This desperate yearning for alteration is the primal scream of the pain that cannot be articulated. If one could simply say, "I am paralyzed by the memory of betrayal," or "the future feels like a suffocating stone," the pressure might release. But because these profound declarations remain unspoken, they coagulate into the intense, singular focus of the craving. The craving is the symptom. The unacknowledged trauma is the disease. The tension escalates as we recognize that the language of addiction is not entirely mute. It speaks, but only in riddles. The behavior itself is an exquisite enigma. Why the specific vice? Why the isolation? Why the meticulous self-set? The answer often lies buried in the initial trauma, the original, catastrophic event that taught the soul that pain is eternal and unpredictable. The addiction, therefore, becomes an attempt to make the pain predictable. If I choose when and how I suffer, if I control the initiation of the chemical storm, I gain a perverse mastery over the randomness of the universe's cruelty. The act is not about losing control, but about seizing it from the hands of fate. The terror, the profound horror of this situation, is that the individual becomes both the jailer and the prisoner, the torturer and the victim. The self that seeks oblivion and the self that despises the seeking are locked in a perpetual, agonizing embrace. This internal conflict defines the complexity of the enigma we are dissecting. We must venture deeper into the chambers of the mind to understand the specific architectural damage caused by the unspoken word. For the silence is not empty. It is populated by specters of trauma, whispering their demands for escape. We have circled the periphery of the unspoken pain, observed its feverish manifestation, and recognized the tragic irony of its disciplined disorder. Now, the atmosphere thickens as we approach the climax of the Raventha moment, where the persistence, chill and whisper nevermore, assumes its most crushing psychological weight. This climax is not a single explosion, but the unbearable tension of sustained, fatalistic insight. The point of high psychological intensity in the study of compulsion is the realization that the addict, in their profound dedication to escape, has inadvertently become the perfect embodiment of what they sought to destroy. The monotonous, repeating pattern of suffering. The original pain was unpredictable and inflicted externally. The current pain is self-inflicted, meticulously scheduled, and, cruelly, entirely predictable. The craving, the relapse, the subsequent despair. This cycle is the relentless, mechanical beat of the raven's wing, a sound that promises only repetition. Consider the language necessary to describe this picor. It is the moment when the mask slips entirely, and the subject recognizes, with a terrifying clarity that cuts deeper than any physical incision, that the chosen escape route has simply deposited them back at the precipice of the original trauma, often with added ballast. The substance or behavior promised temporary transcendence, a flight from the self. Instead, it becomes the most intimate, inescapable mirror. The reflection now shows not merely the original wound, but the grotesque distortion caused by years of attempted self. This is the psychological scream of the video, the convergence of the pain that could not be spoken, and the language of compulsion that speaks only of its own futility. The synthesized idea is this: addiction is the ultimate act of paradoxical worship, where the devotee kneels before the altar of immediate relief, only to discover that the God they serve is merely a projection of their own deepest, most enduring fear. The fear of feeling, the fear of vulnerability, the fear of death, and most pressingly, the fear of life in its unvarnished, demanding complexity. The intensity must be palpable here. We dissect the final defense mechanisms. The addict often develops a profound, almost mystical appreciation for the process of their ritual, elevating it beyond mere vice to a necessary, almost noble tragedy. This romanticization of ruin is the final attempt to rationalize the irrational, to imbue the self-destructive cycle with meaning. But even this grand illusion collapses under the weight of the endless. Nevermore the certainty that the next act of escape will bring no true solace, only a fleeting, expensive reprieve before the inevitable return to earth. The true climax lies in the silence that follows this profound realization. It is the silence that follows the shout of despair, where the intellect, starkly sobered by its own actions, must face the consequence of its chosen dialect. The language of pain has been spoken, and the reply from the universe is merely the echo of the empty chamber. The stage is set now for the ultimate philosophical conclusion, the final, chilling moro, delivered from the shadow of the melee. We descend from the feverish pitch of the climax, moving toward the final message and the legusia space not of facile resolution, but of chilling, enduring philosophical insight. The storm has passed, and we are left observing the wreckage, deciphering the moral inscribed upon the splintered timber of the human soul. What, then, is the enduring legacy of this desperate dialect? If addiction is the language of unspoken pain, the lesson is that silence is a corrosive force. The pain that remains locked away does not wither. It metastasizes into a relentless, destructive engine. The greatest tragedy of the addicted life is not the substance consumed, but the truth that was never articulated, the raw, simple declaration of human need that was withheld until it could only be screamed through the medium of The philosophical conclusion is thus, to live authentically, one must find the courage not only to endure the world's inevitable suffering, but, more importantly, to name it, to give shape and volume to the amorphous terror. The path back from the maelstrom is not paved with abstinence alone, but with the arduous, terrifying work of mastering a new vocabulary, a language of vulnerability, connection, an honest acknowledgement of one's own irreparable fractures. We must learn to speak the pain, rather than let the pain speak for us through the terrifying grammar of compulsion. This is the imperative duty laid upon the survivor of the self-constructed ruin. He must recognize that the dark brilliance employed in the pursuit of oblivion can, if redirected, be harnessed for the meticulous, painful labor of self-reconstruction. The same focus, the same dedication, the same exquisite planning required for the perfect escape must be applied to the more difficult, less glamorous task of enduring consciousness. Our journey concludes with a reflection on the universal application of this insight. Even those who never succumb to overt compulsion are often captives of lesser, more respectable forms of self-anesthesia, ceaseless activity. The relentless consumption, the spiritual numbness, we mistake for stability. We are all, to some degree, attempting to muzzle the telltale heart that beats beneath the floorboards, demanding recognition for its deep, ancestral sorrow. And so, as the final shadows stretch and the spectral light dims, I offer this final, necessary challenge. If this analysis has disturbed your quiet composure, if it has caused you to glance inward and recognize the nascent architect of ruin within your own breast, then the dark voyage has not been in vain. Do not let the truth you have encountered here dissolve into the morning mist. Engage with this spectral analysis. Share your own terrifying clarity, the unspoken truth that your soul struggles to articulate in the comments below. Let the light of shared vulnerability be the antidote to the suffocating silence. Subscribe for more dissections of the beautiful terrifying structure of the human mind. As we continue to chart the geography of grief and the architecture of madness, we all carry a secret sepulchre within us. The true horror is when we mistake the sound of the silence inside for peace. Never let your pain remain unspoken, for if you do not give it voice, it will inevitably find a way to scream through your ruin.